Okay, so just a little bit about me. I am a gender activist, and I am a budding author. I've written a HR book on gender equality at work, and this year wrote my first children's book on gender equality, trying to undo the stereotypes that children receive, the kinds of messages that children receive from a young age. But as I said, I don't identify myself as a ivory tower professor. I consider myself someone who interacts. So if we do ever meet, please don't stand on ceremony. Just a short thank you to Sally and her team for allowing me space. Talk is always supportive of conversations like this. And on that note, let's get started. So what are some of the things that people consider when they look at a maternity role? So maternity leave is basically directed to the birth of a child and often considered a women's issue. And being Women's Month, we need to look at gender equality issues. But I think it's important to not only identify gender equality from a woman's perspective, but more holistically. What are the implications for men? We live in a time where masculinity is possibly defined in the most unattainable sense. A very, very high expectation on men to have a certain level of wealth, a certain level of success. There's a huge pressure to drive a certain car, live in a certain house. And then we also get these messages through a very heteronormative lens. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we get a lot of messages that say that women have particular roles and men have particular roles. And it's very definitive and very binary in that sense, that they are just two extremes that are pumped into our brains from the time children are born, if you really think about it. From the time a little boy is born or a little girl is born, you are buying blue and pink. You are giving those children messages about how it is that they should think in the world, how they should behave, and what ultimately they should aspire to be like. I'm sorry, I think I'm going off on a tangent without departing from my slides. But essentially, people have to also look at paternity leave. So paternity leave is often considered unimportant. This is considered almost like a luxury. And if you think about it, whether you're in a heterosexual relationship or in a same-sex relationship, or you fall under non-binary, or you're in the LGBTQI community, it doesn't matter. When you have a responsibility, whether it is your biological child, or whether you are adopting a child, or whether you have suddenly been given custody of a child, you have a responsibility regardless of whether you are going to be playing a fatherly role or a motherly role. So parental leave is looked at as in addition to ordinary leave, and often is taken when it's the first year that a family accepts that child. And in some cases up to the age of 3 years old, but we will look at comparative studies in other countries. And some countries actually specify that the parental leave portion may be used by adoptive parents as well, rather than just maternity or paternity. And adoption leave is often covered in one of the above. So it's either covered in parental leave or sometimes formally in adopted leave. What is maternity bias? Why do we see a bias? And, if I can just speak just about this, the whole idea of motherhood for working women is so difficult. Yesterday, I delivered something looking at working women in the virtual office. And I'm sure many of you logging on from your homes can relate to the fact that you are juggling so many things. So, looking specifically at you as a working mother, or if you do not necessarily a mother, but a caregiver for extended family or for young children, you will know that there are certain triggers and biases that are associated with women and their careers. So ultimately, performance bias really affects women already. So, even if they don't have children, when they're in the recruitment phase, people, which now is illegal, but people used to ask, how are you looking at getting married, looking at having children? And some people still do that, even though it's illegal. What kind of life do you want? I can remember moving here in 2005, bright and excited, and somebody asking me, when are you going to get married? And I was only 23, and I thought, what is that? Why is that even relevant to my job? So now we see that intensifying as somebody is in their career progression. So they're already in the junior management, or maybe they go into middle management and they decide that they want to have children, or they want to take on caregiving functions. Now with COVID, there's such high death rate for women. A lot of young children are being left unattended, and now we see the parental responsibility being shifted to people perhaps sooner than they thought they were going to have to take on caregiving for their godchildren or nieces or nephews. So because of that pressure on women to, the societal pressure of having a child and then the work pressure of not having a child, mothers are given fewer opportunities. Okay, so just let that settle. Mothers are given fewer opportunities and are held to higher standards than fathers. Okay, and if you look at why that is, if you look at who supports the father, it's the spouse, it's their nanny, it's their domestic worker, it's their aftercare facility, it's their teacher. And if you look at these 5 major areas in their child's life, stereotypically, this is fulfilled by other women supporting that man. Not to mention in the workplace, that person is supported by their office manager, their personal assistant, who often also tend to be women. Obviously, this is just a stereotypical example, but very often those roles are dominated by women. So mothers are very much overlooked for work trips. So think about just, even if you just do this exercise before you even look at, what happens at work trips. If you think about all the things that you do before you log on in the morning, just write a short list. You can even just write it and share it in the chat if you are brave. Before you log on, what are the things that you do versus your spouse? Okay. And yesterday's session, we had some men attend, and they were hammered for the little labor that they do. So you have also the element of unpaid labor. And because of those assumptions of women's roles in the household, you'll find that mothers are overlooked for work trips. Mothers are also overlooked for late meetings. So if you think about meetings that happen maybe after 4, after 5, that are going towards the evening, women are deliberately excluded because it's assumed that, oh no, Natasha has to cook dinner and bath her son, and therefore we're not going to interfere with that. Okay, so almost like what has now become like a VIP online club. Shocking statistic: mothers are half as likely to be promoted. Okay, ridiculous. Internationally, the pay gap is really, just outrageous. I mean, you can have a look at that. We are being paid less for the same job. And in my book, I talk about the pay gap. And in South Africa, we will wait for it, 100 years. That is the estimate. An entire century before women and men are going to be paid the same for the same job. That is the pay disparity, especially at a senior level. So when does maternity bias begin? So I have alluded to this. It's really from the recruitment stage. It's actually from when the person is in front of you in that recruitment stage, but sometimes it's when men and women get engaged. There's a pushback by people because they assume that that couple now wants to have a family. And this also affects men as well, because fathers who take time off for family commitments are also penalized. Many of them will get messages like, don't you have a spouse? Don't you have a nanny? Don't you have an au pair? And honestly, those questions should not be there. We are trying to create a new masculinity, a new kind of fatherhood. And then we have conflicting messages saying, this is a woman's place. So men are requested to default to their partners. Again, there's no shame in even just them receiving that. They are asked as almost like in like a machoistic kind of manner, that care of children is associated with women, And those men are then penalized on their performance. I mean, you know, it's basically on both sides of the scale. So paid versus unpaid leave. So in the South African state, we are very fortunate for people who are permanently employed. They receive their full salary for up to 6 months. Okay, and if they add on their leave, they can go up to 7 or 8 months of paid leave. But there are many companies that then request women to access the UIF, which really, I mean, my sister-in-law went through this, and it is just, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that when at the time where now you are coming to terms with looking after a child, whether it's biologically yours or not, irrelevant, you now have the added pressure of economics constraints. Excuse me. So if you look at the latest parental leave laws, which was last year was the most updated, they have included fathers, they've included adopting parents, as well as surrogate parents, are entitled to 10 days of unpaid parental leave. Exciting. Thanks, Cyril. But basically, we can't fight this. This is literally 10 days that people are allowed to go. So it's like, okay, have fun, but you will literally lose 2 weeks of your salary in that month. It's 10 working days. Okay, so in April 2021, Volvo Cars looked at a family bond policy. Okay, and if you look at this, the family bond policy gives all employees at least 1 year's service. Will give all employees with at least 1 year's service, meaning you have to work there for 1 year, a total of 24 weeks leave at 80% of their base pay. Okay, so that is quite generous, 24 weeks at 80% of your salary. And then just some more information about the birth rate and the extent, and that it actually extends to surrogate parents, non-birth parents, as well as same-sex couples. So the Volvo policy, 2021, they're quite progressive, this is going to basically be implemented in South Africa. Okay, so let's have a look at how we compare. So in other countries, we have a look. Bulgaria, 58.6 weeks paid leave. It's amazing to me, okay? Greece, United Kingdom, Slovakia, going all the way down to Luxembourg with 20 weeks. Okay, so this is, the global standards. And noteworthy is, despite offering the longest maternity leave, the percentage of salary paid to employees during the covered period varies. So some countries cover the new mother's total wages, while others pay as little as 1/4. I think South Africa is like slightly below that 1/4 if you look at what the UIF is paying. Okay, so if you look at the weeks being paid, Luxembourg pays 100%, but remember Luxembourg is giving 20 weeks. Croatia, 100%, Bulgaria, 90%, all the way down to Ireland, which looks at 1/4. Okay, so these are considered, first world countries way ahead of us. But again, they are also looking at what is. So I really apologize for the quality of the colors that showed up here. But I hope that, when this is maybe available to you via email, you can look at this more closely. But if you look at the red, which is perhaps my main point, no paid leave in most of the world. Okay, so if you look at the United States, massive parts of Africa, India, the Far East, literally half of literally half of New Zealand. So if you think about it, there is no paid leave mainstreamed. I mean, literally mainstreamed in the world. Less than 3 weeks in like the light orange, and then 3 to 13 weeks in the sort of like tanned color, and then 14 weeks or more in green. Okay, so we are sort of in the less than 3 weeks bracket. I did say, the state is an exception, but in the general public, in our organizations, we are on the less than 3 weeks bracket. So that's quite concerning, for families the world over. Okay, and then not to bore you, let's just have a quick look at the MERCER report. So if you look at the MERCER leave report in 2019, globally, 3/4 of companies reflect 80% or more of the eligible employees use their paid paternity leave. Okay, so they actually use it. But in developed nations, which is very interesting, in developed nations, that number is shockingly lower. In over 1/4 of companies in developed countries, fewer than 30% of eligible employees use their fully paid paternity leave. 23% of men in developed countries who could be taking paid paternity leave, but they're not, they're just leaving it. And I think that is where in a country where you are allowed, you are being paid to stay at home, people are not taking that up. And why is that? And I think it goes back to a few slides previously, we were saying that the negative implications for men who perhaps do take that up. And obviously men now trying to also get ahead in their careers whilst trying to be fathers. So what is the future of the workforce? I would say, and this is just really broad, and it's not going to solve everything, and it's not a magical pill, it's only some suggestions. Have parental leave policies in place for men so that both men and women have the psychological message that they should be looking after their own children. And this is, not taking anything away from active fathers. Active fathers should be celebrated and not penalized for accessing that workplace arrangement. Take a harder look at your existing paternal leave policies and expand your paternity policy. Offer paid paternity. You saw that we are getting 10 days unpaid from South Africa as of last year. And allow leadership to support it. And I think here we're not just looking at the management function saying, okay, tick, tick, this person has taken their leave and this person hasn't. Parenting should be a shared responsibility. And we haven't even gone into discussion about same-sex couples where, fathers are then penalized because now there's nothing applicable to them. If you have two men trying to raise a family, they won't be able to access any kind of supportive leave for their children. And interestingly, in South Africa, because of our laws, there's a higher number of same-sex couples adopting children than there are heterosexual couples. Cultural mind shift, and this, I don't know whether I'll be alive to see this, but basically this cultural mind shift has to happen. Many people feel that their culture determines how it is that they should and shouldn't behave. And my response to that is that every generation has the responsibility to determine what the culture is. Okay, you cannot be implementing things that people have been doing in 1950. It's no longer 1950. In 1950, there were no mobile phones. If you missed a call, you just waited until someone called you back. So a cultural mind shift is needed in the business space to address gender gaps, to look at the importance of paternity leave. And the support means that it's not just policy, because again, we're going to have a tick box exercise. We need men whose peers support paternity leave. And I think it's the same. You'll see for mothers and fathers in the last bullet, that mothers should also be celebrated for wanting to have children. This should not be a deal breaker for performance. And I think that corporates need to look at the unfair labor balance in the home and how women need their spouses. And, you know, in a non-heteronormative way, people just need support from each other, you know. They really, in this particular space that we are in, living through a pandemic with homeschooling on and off, and, you know, children basically being displaced, and so many more responsibilities on working people. I don't know whether you saw 3 days ago, the unemployment rate is now 36%. But those people who are working, and especially working from home, are assumed to be not as productive and given more responsibility. And that assumption is possibly the worst kind of assumption one can make, because now the labor demands on both men and women in the household is so much more. And with salaries being affected, the stuff that you may have had prior to the pandemic, like a nanny, like a full-time domestic worker, may not be affordable anymore. It may actually have to shift to the main members of the household. What can HR do? So I'm saying policy reform. Researchers have shown that men work longer hours and earn more after becoming parents. But if they need to reduce or change work hours for family reasons, they may experience a flexibility stigma. And women experience that, where, you know, you have to go and look after your children. The flexibility stigma is, you know, already placed on women, that even if they're not, you know, running off to and from schools, that somehow they are disengaged. And the same will then apply to men. So I think that besides just the policy reform, which is important, you must put it in writing to say that you have a flexible working arrangement for people who may not have access to any other network. You'll find that many people living in Johannesburg are not originally from here. People come here mainly for work and don't have proper support networks. So that kind of flexibility must be allowed, not only, you know, for people who have children who are biologically theirs, but who need to support other people. And I think that is really the way in which the world should work. Advice for HR managers: support an organizational culture. And this is not, again, an events-driven exercise. This is a behavioral change, holding people accountable for things like sexist jokes and inappropriate comments, silencing of people in meetings. That culture around parents and how it is they are, you know, and I'm sure, you know, at times it can be frustrating to hear about Joe Soap's child who, you know, is celebrated for, I don't know, crawling, building blocks. It may seem insignificant, but it is part of human nature for people to engage, because you are engaging with people at work for most of your life. You know, if you look at the hours that you allocate to interaction. Offer phased returns. So phased returns offer check-in days. So what are check-in days? So during leave and a gradual return that ramps up. So you don't just come to work after 6 months leave or 2 months leave or whatever, and then just, like, you know, fly into it. You actually gradually go back to work, meaning that you start with 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, and then gradually you move into that. And I wish that was available, you know, to me when I had a child. Set up mentoring programs for returning employees. So many people experience separation anxiety. I mean, my son is 4, and I still have separation anxiety when he leaves me. I know, it's kind of ridiculous, but people need that kind of a sort of like mentoring program, even maybe a counseling program for new parents, regardless of whether they are the biological parents, mothers and fathers. You know, I had the same feelings when my niece was born. So group coaching for the transition to work, and also, you know, for parents to realize that they are still individuals. And I think many people, when they become first-time parents, biological or not, they tend to lose themselves and their sight of their own goals. And I think, you know, in that way, you can still have a caregiving employee who's also a high performer, because now they psychologically have come to terms with the various roles that they have to fulfill. Creating open dialogue. Look, this is very hard, and it's easier said than done about individuals' communication preferences. But I think this can be done through almost like a litmus test. If you do just an anonymous survey, or looking at a specific plan for handovers at the start and at the end of leave. But you'd have to check each person's communication style that they want before maternity and paternity leave. Also check your assumptions about new parents' career and family priorities. Sometimes people need to change their work schedule, and now during COVID, because the economy is not moving at such a fast rate anymore, perhaps a different kind of working relationship. And also be aware that it's deeply personal. Parenting is a deeply personal experience. Many people are not like me, helicopter mother. Many people are like, okay, well, drop their kids off at the mall and they're gone. And I don't know whether I can ever be that. But anyway, we shall get to that at a different stage in my life. But basically, this is a crucial element in the experience that you have to allow people to transition, to go through the various phases. And having that, the personal connection, again, it may seem like she's speaking up in the air, but it's so important to have that connection with the people who are going through that whole maternity, paternity issue. And then these are just some references that you can reflect on. These are some sources that you can have a look at. Some I drew from for this presentation, and others are things that you can just reference to see what is current and now in 2021. So thank you very much for listening to me. I appreciate it. And I'll now hand over back to Sally. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Natasha. That was really insightful. We at Talk haven't done the phased returns, but that's something I definitely think that I'd like to build in for us personally here. Something I hadn't considered before, but definitely would be beneficial, I think, because it is quite a transition coming back to work after being away for a while. So yeah, that was very, very interesting. The coaching sessions as well, to sort of on-ramp back into the business. I think those are definitely two things I'll be incorporating at Talk. Nolo, I'm going to hand over to you now and just ask if you can give some comments from a legal perspective and some views around what corporate can do in this space.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I think the first thing to remember is that and thank you so much, Natasha, for just how you've simplified that information and what's available and the options that are available. I find that a lot of the time there's an assumption that this is what the law is, therefore I will apply what the law says. The law is the minimum standard, right? It says this is the what you can't go below, but you can go above and beyond that if you are able to. And a lot of the times, employees, when they do ask, can we do it differently? The answer that they are met with is, but the basic conditions of employment say, and if I break them, I will break the law. And HR told me I can't, right? Which is not the reality of it all. Ultimately, it's you have the law, yes, as your basic. But when you have a better sense of the employees within your business and their needs, when you have a better sense of actually asking these questions, and because I also find that a lot of the time, we then implement policies that don't really solve for the people we are trying to solve for, because you haven't asked the questions, you haven't engaged with the employees. So yes, the law will guide us. The law will give us a sense of what's the right thing to do, but there's nothing that says you can't go above that. And I like to Natasha's point earlier around, nothing says you can't have gender neutral policies around this stuff, because you can start treating as if I want to be, as much as we speak about, active fathers, what if I am not the mother who wants to be at home for that long? What if I want to go back to work early? But even the fact that I dare say that out loud, then I'm judged for that because, oh, then you're not a good mother. You don't like being a mother. What's wrong with you, And the sad thing is, it tends to come from other women. Even before men don't even think about the stuff half the time until that you're in front of them and they're uncomfortable and they have to say something. So I think it's having flexible working arrangements that say you are not breaking the law because you are making the minimum very much available. But you need to think about in a practical way of what works for your business and what works. And the default excuse we always get is we can't afford to pay people for that long. Well, really now, what actually are you spending the money on that you could be spending on things like maternity leave? And again, to the point made earlier around you can claim UIF. Try and go through that process. It is not the easiest. It takes a lot of time. I know a lot of women who ultimately go, you know what, actually, never mind. I will take 6 weeks off and then I'll go back to work because it's just too much. I don't want to be dealing with someone from the labor department again. And it shouldn't be made that difficult. Surely if we, and I always love it when a corporate has family values as part of their culture. But when you look at the practice and the policy behind it, doesn't speak to that. And then the response you get is, but the law says, and I've made the law, the legal basics available. So yes, and can the law be better? Can it be changing? Of course. I mean, I read recently a paper about research being done on how do we start including people in the informal sector in a world that says, I can also claim UIF if I can't work because I'm self-employed and I don't have any other income. So yes, those conversations are happening and they're being thought about, but I think there's a sense of needing to be proactive as well, and understanding that we can't always wait for the law to dictate the right thing to do. And that policy is very important in writing, yes, but it has to be a practice. It has to be a culture of the business. It is very great to say, I will give Nolo 6 months paid maternity leave. You go do what you need to do. But a week before I give birth, you are sending me WhatsApps. 3 days when I get home, you are sending me an email. You haven't given me maternity leave. All you've done is put it in writing. But my actual experience is that I'm not on leave. I'm actually working then. And I think this period we are in right now is very interesting for me because I had a client say to me, so my boss said, it's fine, you can take your 6 weeks. It's wonderful, be with your baby. And then you can work from home because then the baby will be there next to you and then you'll be with the baby. So you guys are bonding, but you can answer emails quickly. What? And he thought he had come up with the most amazing solution to his problems because she's the only person who can do the work, right? So the fact that the business has no plan for succession or handing over must now be her problem because now she must be while baby is crying. And then he goes, but don't breastfeed during Zoom meetings. Just don't do that part, right? So I think even the way we apply the law sometimes is discriminatory. The way you will see what are called breastfeeding rooms in some offices. It's literally a dark room with like 2 chairs and that horrible gray carpet, no windows. And you just, but this is where you can pump. We've made the space available to you. So please use it. So yes, you've ticked a box, but you haven't made it easier for me to use the space. It's not conducive. And now everyone knows I'm going to pump because everyone can see me with my bag and I'm running. And so I think for me, that's where the rubber hits the road, where it's not just about saying I've ticked the box and I've followed the law. It's not just about saying I have a policy that says here it is, I can show you. But it's also about saying, what do you do? How do you treat people? And how do you make it easier? Because if you say I can work half day as I transition back, but every time I pick up my bag to leave, I get looks from everyone in the team, then you know what, actually you can keep your half day. I'd rather sit at home and sit in the office and rather work, because now I'm worried about how everyone perceives me. And I think the same thing applies. I made an example earlier about having a colleague who, when he said, I will be, my child is in the hospital, so I will be working from there and my wife will be at work. And all the ladies in the team said, but why can't your wife do that? It's her job. Why are you the one doing that? So I think for me, it's beyond understanding what the legal requirements are, but also understanding what your employee requirements are, what their needs are, and how you can make that practical and take the law, which is supposed to be this difficult we have to all comply, and not make it about compliance, but make it about the people experience in your business and how you make their lives a bit easier while following the law. And for bigger corporates also, while informing the law, because it's not just about waiting for lawmakers. There are ways which we can inform the law. And at times we don't get involved in that process, and we kind of step back because we say we've done the basics. So whenever I think about this stuff and the legal requirements, I'm always like, how do we make it practical? How do we make it practical as humanly possible? Because that's what simplifies people's lives. And if my life is simplified, you bet I'm going to give a bit more to you as a company, because I can see you see me as a person, and you see my needs as a person, and you are not just ticking a box because the law says you must, but you're doing it because you see the need for it, and you see how it makes my life better. Therefore, I will be a better employee for you. It's such a mutual relationship. And if we come up at it from that angle, I think it works a lot better. You know, where you have I've worked for corporates where we would all joke and say, this is such a, if you want to have your babies while you're working here, because it's okay, have your family, start your family, grow your family. It doesn't change where your career is growing or where your trajectory is growing. And it's not just about discrimination, it's about we're doing the right thing for our people. So my advice would be constantly thinking about, how do I make sure my employees are engaged? And that's by doing the right thing by them, in all honesty.
Thanks, Nola. And also, I think looking at I think Lauren shared a very interesting YouTube clip with us the other day, from a TED talk, where they were talking about looking at questions that are asked in a performance review and reevaluating those and seeing that, are you asking in performance reviews questions like, well, are you making assumptions on performance reviews and saying to people, oh, this person doesn't want to progress, and you're making that assumption purely based on the fact that person has recently become a parent. So you know, do you think that doing reviews of your performance reviews as well is beneficial?
Definitely. If we're honest, the law is not meant to be looked at in silos and in vacuums, and the same thing applies to your policies in the company. They all work together and they are interlinked. So from the way that you are looking at your performance, your succession planning, your talent management, you have sometimes a person is said, you are talent, you're a top performer. The minute they announce that they're pregnant, it's like, your mentor's very busy and we don't have the time. We'll relook you being on the talent pool when you come back. But I'm still working, right? I'm still performing. Also earlier I was sharing, I think because of the stigma, you also then make it harder on yourself. I remember falling pregnant and thinking to myself, I will show them that I can be as capable, if not more capable, while I am pregnant, right? Because I have to prove that I still belong here and my performance rating must still be as high as it was. Because now I'm trying to chase this target. And to be honest, I overworked myself for no reason. And nobody made me do it. No one said to me that's an expectation. No manager. I worked for a mother. She at no point had said that to me. She at no point had made me feel that I'd be somehow penalized, but I did that to myself. But because I knew that there's a document that says, if you are away for the 4 months, we then have to adjust your performance rating. Therefore, so it's almost like whatever I did while I was gone is forgotten. And what I did before I left is completely not applicable. So you're definitely right. You have to look at your processes across the board and make sure that they do work and they speak to each other, and not, you can't write them in silos. You can't write them in separation of each other. Yes, they sit in different departments, but I think especially in the HR space, it's always good to have one area where it all comes together, like a central reviewing space where you make sure that your processes all speak to each other and that they're not contradicting each other and kind of fighting against each other.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nola. And Claire, can I ask, I know, how should people handle if they are on the receiving end of maternity bias? And I'm going to speak obviously across all genders in this regard. My husband, for example, had to leave his corporate job because he carries the bulk of the parental responsibility and is the primary caregiver in our home. And he constantly was being persecuted and asked, can't your wife do it? So how would you recommend having those conversations at work?
Thank you, and it's lovely to be here. I think for me, the starting point is I was particularly struck, Natasha, about what you said about our pay disparity will take 100 years to get right. And that even where the laws support people taking leave, people aren't always doing it. And for me, that really speaks to the importance of using our voices and speaking up. Nothing changes if nothing changes. It doesn't matter if the laws are there. It doesn't matter if we have the systems in place that are supposed to support us if we don't have enough people speaking about why they need to do it. And I think that your example of your husband is probably all too common. I know that we had a situation where my husband somebody said to him, well, you're going to have to work out the babysitting thing if this is going to work. And he's like, but I don't babysit, I parent. We all have an obligation to use our voices and speak up. So I think for me, the very first part is the need to communicate. Wherever we sit in this, whether we're the parent or the primary caregiver, whether we're somebody returning from maternity leave, and Sana, I saw your comment about you don't know how you're going to feel when you come back. You know, I've had some clients who are on their laptops in the hospital bed like 3 hours after having their Caesar. And I have other clients who have thought that they're going to go back to work and be as career focused as they were beforehand, and who just don't feel it after having the baby, need more time to get over it. And so the first thing is really being able to say what's going on with us. What do we want? And importantly, I think using I messages. You know, often we feel defensive or we're nervous about how the conversation is going to land. And so we start talking in general terms. And that doesn't help anybody. But if we go to our manager and say, can I speak to you about what I'm experiencing or how this is landing on me? Can I explain what I need to do in order to be successful? There are a number of women who I coach who have gone to their businesses and said, I am now taking the lead role in homeschooling, and I have young children where I have to keep getting them back onto the Zoom classroom because they press the wrong buttons and exit. And, you know, we need to be much more involved. It's not like my kids are older, they can do it themselves. But those women, if they have teams where they're learning to communicate or practicing using their voice, can say, could we schedule the really important pitches or conversations at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock? You know, being able to use your voice and come up with solutions, but sharing our personal perspective. Because often I think we hope that our business is going to know how things are landing on us, and we get resentful when people aren't being accommodating, but we're not actually explaining what's going on for us. I've spoken to women who have worked the whole way through their maternity leave, Nolo, exactly to your point, where you take maternity leave, but you'll still be available on WhatsApp, won't you? And like you could answer a few emails. I know a lot of women who've done that, and the level of resentment is huge. Resentment within their own families and the pressure they put themselves under, but also resentment to the company. And those are people who you will end up losing at some point. As women or as primary caregivers, sitting and living with that resentment is not helpful to us or to the environment or to anyone. And so being able to say, actually, I want to take my maternity leave or paternity leave properly, so that I can bond in the way that I want, and I will return to work at this time. I think the idea of a flexible return is great, but again, we need to have the conversation about what works for us. I think Nolo and Natasha both mentioned that idea of don't assume. Every single person is unique. Whether we're cisgender, heteronormative, or whether we come from a different kind of family structure, whether it's whoever is the primary parent, each of us is going to have a way of parenting in a way that we want to get that blend right for us that is unique to us. And so it's important as managers and as parents that we have the conversation. There was a really interesting piece of research about performance appraisals and how often when people are mothers, notes get made on a performance appraisal that they don't want to make a partnership. That's a guess. when this company changed their rules around performance appraisals and said you may only make a note that somebody is taking the foot off the pedal and doesn't want to make a partner or is less ambitious if they explicitly say that. And their experience in the next round of performance appraisals was that one woman explicitly stated that. That was a difference in their previous round of performance appraisals. 70% of women were noted as not wanting to make partner. So we need to use our words and we need to stop making assumptions. And then the other big thing for me is perspective. We need to sit in other people's chairs. You know, we need to understand what's going on in the business. If we are somebody who's super ambitious, we need to be making sure that we're communicating that and that we can absorb the judgment, because there's always going to be judgment from other people. But we also need to be able to say, what does the business need and how can I support the business? Or what suggestions can I make about how we do blended, whether somebody else supports my team, whether we have core working hours. You know, are there certain times where we need everybody to be available so that as a mum, I can have another childcare plan in place during that time? And are there times when we have slightly more flexibility, particularly in a work from home scenario? But let's have the conversations and try and understand each other's perspective without judgment, with this humble curiosity about what kind of parent do you want to be, what works in your world. And I think the other really important component for me in this is that when we have the conversations, we need to think about what the outcome we want from it is. Because we often go wading into these conversations when we're already cross, when we're already hooked or triggered, when we're already over capacity. And then our probability of getting a good outcome is relatively low. And so I think it always helps to stop and to say, I need to have a conversation. Who do I need to have this conversation with? What are the outcomes I want from the conversation? And then what is the best strategy for ensuring that outcome? What are the examples I'm going to give? What are the suggestions or solutions that I'd like to put forward? And to be able to go into that conversation seeking the solution and the outcome, rather than getting hijacked by the feelings that often precipitate the need for the conversation. I think, as with everything, the more we kind of plan and prepare and think through, the better our outcomes are going to be. But the fact that we need to have these conversations is obvious. And the only way we're going to get that pay parity, get any sort of pay parity, is by each of us having those conversations and by us encouraging our partners, the men in our lives, to stand up in their work context and to have those conversations with the women that they work with too. Hope that answers the question.
It does. Thanks, Claire. Does anybody have some other questions or that you'd like to ask Claire, Nolo, or Natasha? If you do, please pop them in the chat and we can go through them. Sana, I see you'd had a question here a little bit earlier. I'm not sure if everyone saw Natasha's answer. You asked about the opinion on parental leave laws being influenced by the country birth rate. Natasha, could I ask if you could just answer that question to the group?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Ellie. So my response was that it's not really about the birth rate. It's more the ideas about parenthood that need to be changed. It's not necessarily like, what is the birth rate, and that should have a direct correlation to the number of leave days, etc. It's more the attitude, because if you saw from slides, there are first world countries that offer, 80%, 100% paid leave to men. But because of the stigma that actually this is women's work, they're not even taking that. So it's more about the mind shift, the cultural shift, and really an acceptance that gender roles are social constructs. And we need to change the way that people think about child rearing and whether that even has a relationship to someone's career progression. And, you know, those barriers are also social constructs where, like Claire was saying, you know, somebody's making a note to say that this person doesn't want to be a partner on the basis that they have a family. So, you know, possibly more so they'd want to be a partner because they have to afford university fees for the next 20 years. So I think, you know, the attitude by organizations can only be changed through individual, almost like a revolution of thinking. Because we can say, you know, the government needs to make a new policy or organizations need to make a new policy. But as we've seen, you know, policies can only go so far in that transformation. People have to internalize it. People have to support it. And I think, you know, in creating a new kind of idea about masculinity and femininity and what that is, that's the only way that we can move forward. And I think we find ourselves in a very progressive space where we are interacting with like-minded people. But just to give you an example, I've been doing some of the youth gender conversations at lunchtime stuff at NMNU. And you would think that, you know, being 18 years old or 19 years old, we're going to get different ideas coming out in those gender-based violence conversations, ideas about young women's leadership, and all the same stuff that we experience as older people is basically being duplicated. It's generational. And I was quite shocked and frustrated and also sad, because I had felt that, you know, here I am speaking to students, they must be so enlightened, they've got so many things to say, and actually it's the same old, may as well been, you know, a 70-year-old traditional man that I was speaking to. So, you know, until we can see the value of that and give different messages, and it's not only, you know, going to come from a workspace, it has to be through things like media transformation. You know, now we have broadcasting laws about, you know, sex scenes and use of language, etc. But are we even policing the kinds of things that are being developed that reinforce the ideas of, you know, toxic masculinity and that women have a particular place, men have a particular place? All of that is just being duplicated through things like music videos, social media, Hollywood. It just continues. So I think, you know, the Time's Up and Me Too campaigns have shed some light on it, and I think it has died down since 2018. And someone's just commented now about we need more of these conversations and not just in Women's Month. And Musa, we were speaking about that, you know, in the start of this, that there's always a massive drive during Women's Month. And these are everyday conversations, everyday behavioral change that has to be implemented, has to be policed. And I find that, you know, calling people out on the sexist comments and jokes in an aggressive manner doesn't seem to do much. So I fake that I don't understand what they mean. And the more someone tries to explain what they mean, the more ridiculous they realize they sound. So I think, you know, it's only through those kinds of practical actions that we can change spaces, because otherwise we just have people with degrees coming out of universities with no real analytical lens of the world. They just have a piece of paper, you know, saying that they've got a degree in accounting or whatever it is, and then no enlightened view of how they should somehow change the way they live. Thanks.
Danelle, I think you've put such a great comment here, and I saw a comment earlier about what you guys are offering in terms of benefits, which is really amazing. And you know, I hope more companies pick up the standard that you set. But Danelle commented there, the challenge remains the career impact on women post-maternity, despite how lucrative the benefits. And I want to actually just pose, I know we're nearly out of time, but I actually want to pose this question to Claire and ask, do you believe that there is a coaching aspect that can come into play here where where people can start to be coached around, I don't want to use the phrase of having it all, but, you know, about how to have those conversations around, you know, where their career path is going, because in my opinion, it shouldn't have to be an either or thing. So can I ask, what are your thoughts, or how can a business help prepare somebody for that?
I think it's such an interesting question, because I do think coaching plays a huge role, because it allows us to clarify, you know, when you're having coaching, you're working with a thinking partner, and that allows you to clarify what you want. And when you know what you want, it becomes that much easier to actually show up as that fully. And it strikes me, you know, so much of these gender biases are unconscious. I was very aware, and I see it often with women, there's an assumption when we have a baby that the mother knows best, that the mother knows what a baby should eat and how it should eat and what the sleeping plan should be, and that you need one cotton wool ball for each eye when you're cleaning a newborn's eye. And the reality is that the father has as much experience in being a parent as the mother does. Nobody is the expert. And quite frankly, I think the starting point is mum saying, we're both experts in this, so I expect my co-parent to co-parent as an equal. When that is happening, I can then go into a workplace and much more confidently be able to say, I have an effective co-parent who I work with. And so I am committed to showing up and being ambitious and building my career. I think women work jolly hard when they're ambitious and wanting to build a career. I think we get extraordinary bang for our buck from women. But as women, we need to own our space and step up and again, challenge, kind of be able to say, what makes you think that because I have children, I am so overcome with compassion that I can't take tough business decisions anymore? Because that's one of the unconscious biases that is there. What makes you think that because you've seen me go to a school play, that doesn't mean I can't navigate a disciplinary issue in the workplace? We have to show up authentically. And I think very often women do come across as a little bit volatile in the workplace, because we swallow the resentment and the poor treatment, and we swallow and swallow until we get super cross, and then we fly off the handle. I'm sure everybody's seen it at work, you know. So then somebody gets cross and has an emotional response, and then everybody goes, yeah, you see, there we go. And I think that when we're doing our own work, when we're in coaching, when we're doing the thinking, it allows us to show up when we still have the capacity to call people out earlier, or to articulate what we need clearly and unemotionally, so that we can start navigating what is meaningful for us and make sure that everybody knows what that is. But I think that so often we do it reactively. And when we come back after maternity leave, often the maternity leave has been short. We're sleep deprived because often the women are still the people doing most of the care. We're under financial stress because we've been penalized for having the child. We're wanting to prove ourselves, and our hormones can still be all over the show. And if we're breastfeeding, then that's a whole nother thing with breast pads and leaky boobs and stuff, and going into horrible rooms. We're going to be more emotional. And the only way we can show up and show people that we are still serious is if we're doing that work and preparing ourselves for how we have the conversation and how we navigate that transition period.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for sharing with us this morning, and to everybody for joining us. And I think just a big thank you as well to showing up for each other in these spaces, and, you know, to have these conversations. I certainly don't think my mother's generation was able to have the conversations that we have now, and that we're able to communicate and articulate a lot more about the realities. So I'd like to thank you all for that as well, because I think that is the way that we're able to make changes. So Yeah, thank you. And I hope that you all have a wonderful and beautiful Friday moving forward. And I look forward to chatting to you all again.